All right, I'm going to start up. Today is Wednesday, the 2nd of December. As I typically have you do at the beginning of class, I've asked people to go out to the P drive for the class, find the folder with today's date on it, and copy it over to either their desktop or their virtual desktop. So I will do the same. So there's the 12.2 folder. Copy. Paste. So I'm using the same exact one you are. I did want to mention to you, so you hear this, I did go back and I did retape that thing at home after I left here on Monday. So where it says this is down now on both on YouTube, and you can get the link to it here on Blackboard. It's about 50 minutes long. Okay, so that stuff is out there, as will the one for the rest of the day, the end of the day today. I did mention also, if you weren't here last time, that in that in-class folder, I found a copy online of a PDF of the book I'm going to be using for the 152-143 beginning Java programming class. That's down there. It says starting out with Java 6th edition. All right. So we'll see how we go time-wise here today, because if we finish early, I want to just go for an hour, but if we do finish early, I might actually go into chapter 1 in that book. I brought it up just so you can see it. There's very little that's in there that I want to talk to you about. I don't feel like I'm the guy that you should hear about. This is what RAM is. This is what ROM is. This is what a CPU is. And chapter 1 goes into some of that stuff. This is not a program, the IT web software developer program, that goes into a lot of hardware. All right, but chapter 1 in that book, that's about half of that chapter. It's not a very long chapter. All right, but we'll see where we get to. All right. I'm supposed to, keep reminding you over the last 3 weeks that if you have not registered yet, to please register. All right. And that said, if you have not heard, what is it? I believe it's the 152-147 class that Denny's teaching. That's the Relational Database Development class. That's filled. So I went and told Gina, my boss, that yesterday, and she asked if I would be willing to teach an online version of it. I said I would. She's going to think about whether or not she wants to do that. So that's fine. She said, I'll let you know as soon as I can. The other courses, the other one with Denny has got, I think, 21 in it. The Ajax class has got about 17, something like that. And I believe that the other one, the Beginning Java, also has around 17. Okay? All right. So, you remember last time, there's a lot more stuff that wasn't in here on the last time I showed you this, but this is the thing that we went over last time. I'm not going to go over that at all today. All right, we've already gone over it. I explained to you how I went out to free HTML5 templates, found the blue night sky, made a bunch of changes in it so it became, for lack of better words, my own. You may or may not agree with that. But instead, what I want to do is talk about some of the stuff that I put in here. All right, first thing I want to warn you of, and that is if you go down to the Canvas, this one might drive you a little nuts because this was a Canvas demo. And sometimes when people see stuff like that on the screen, literally, if I knew for example, first of all, I would never be teaching this course to a class of schizophrenic people. But if I was, I wouldn't show something like that, because they've actually done studies where people have gone out to sites like that, and if they've got problems, it's made them go into seizures and whatever. But I just thought that was kind of a neat program, so I put that one out there. But there are 12 different programs that are here. All right, all of them work to some degree, except the form validation I still have some problems with. But what I'd like to do is go over these 12 with you and get that one off the screen and just talk a little bit about what was in here. Again, I went out to the webcodegeeks.com website. I think I told you this last time. So webcodegeeks.com. And it's interesting because I like this site because they write a lot. They've got a lot of good articles, pertinent articles, relevant articles, and current articles. And this morning when I was out there, they had looking for web contributors. So I couldn't find a copy of my resume because they wanted one. But I'm going to send one out this afternoon and see if I can possibly write some stuff for them. Maybe they'll have no interest. I don't have any idea. I have no idea. People, well, you're going to get paid? I don't care. Yeah, it'd be nice, But if they say, well, you can write stuff and you can get your name known out there, but we can't pay you, that's fine too. I don't really care. All right. But we'll see. But again, this is where I took virtually all the examples out of. So the HTML5, if you go through here, you'll notice there's about 8 or 9 examples here, and there's 4 pages. So there's around 30 to 35 HTML5 articles. On the CSS, same kind of thing. Okay, so I grabbed 4 from each one of those, and I also grabbed 4 from the jQuery. jQuery's got a lot more. So literally for the 167 class, if you decide that during the break you really want to look at starting to learn some JavaScript and jQuery, maybe in more depth and breadth of coverage than we did in the class, this is a nice place to start. All right, so of course it's not the only place, but the articles, like I said, they're short. And what I like about these articles is, just grab one of these. Okay, the jQuery selector. You can see how long the article is. Oops. So, whoops. Not like that, you can't. So there it is. And you might say, well, that's not short, but there's a lot of code in there. And if you print it out, it's about 5 or 6 pages. But virtually every time they do this, they put you can download the full source code. What better way to learn a language than to get a bunch of code examples and start digging through the code examples? All right. Okay. So as we take a look at this, that's what I decided I wanted to do. So this first one, this slideshow, I grabbed a bunch of Beatle album covers, and it's got a very simple little slideshow that it puts in there with them. Okay? I didn't like what they had with theirs. But you can always go back then. And again, this is HTML5 slideshow example.html. So you can always go in, view the page source, and take a look at everything that's in there. All right. I'm not going to go through this one just because of the fact there's really just HTML5 code in it. There really isn't any jQuery in it, so to speak, other than the stuff I mentioned last time to turn on that light box and a few other things. But this is just something that's literally been set up with HTML5. All right. Same with the next one. Here's a contact form. Now, I set these up. I didn't worry about playing with the CSS, etc. in there, but this just shows how you can add a form to a site. Okay. The next one, the form validation, got a little funky when I put it in. You notice it changed the tabs a little bit and stuff. I didn't really care. I didn't take the time to fix it. But you'll notice in here that if you click submit, you basically, everything that's in here you have to put in, and you have to put it in valid. So notice, please fill out this field. Well, if I put in that, it comes in and it says that's not a valid email. I'm not going to go through all of them. You get the idea. All right. But again, if you take a look at what is in here and you do a view page source, you can start looking through everything that's in that form that is right here. So if you're still a little bit unsure or having any kind of problems with writing an HTML5 form, with working with required fields, number fields, etc., that's why I put in this example. All right. Again, there are plenty of examples out there. This isn't necessarily the best one. It just happens to be the one that I used. All right. And then finally, there's that canvas. And the only thing I would say about this, just so you know it, is there is a little bit of stuff in here. This is not jQuery. This is some JavaScript that's right in here. And I just put it inline. I really should have put it into another file, but I just threw it in there. And the main reason I put this in here is I didn't want you to not hear this. All right. Again, I have no idea what Jim does or does not mention in his class. And to be honest with you, it's not really going to be of my concern, except that I want you to understand that one of the reasons that HTML5 was created, one of the many reasons, well, 2 of them. First of all, HTML itself had virtually no support for audio and for video. All right. And so what happened was that's one of the reasons that things like Flash got so popular. All right. But Apple has made the decision that virtually everything that's Apple, they're not supporting Flash. All right. So what did that mean? Well, Microsoft jumped in then and said, well, we'll create kind of our own version of Flash. And they did. And they called it Silverlight. All right. And as you probably would guess, Apple didn't really jump on that either. Apple not jumping on a Microsoft product shouldn't really surprise you that much. All right. But what has happened with HTML5 is they've added an audio and a video tag. That's the good news. The bad news is the different formats that are supported, the different audio formats and the different video formats that are supported vary from browser to browser. All right, and that's the bad thing. Ideally, over time, that's going to all intermingle where you won't have to worry about different, well, this format is supported for Mac and this one is supported for whatever it happens to be. If it's browser dependent, if it's manufacturer dependent, it doesn't matter. Ideally, that they'll all get together. I don't know when that'll be. But another reason that HTML5 was created was by default, versions prior to HTML5 did not do a good job of creating graphics. All right, and it's gotten better. This is an example of using the canvas, which has pretty much been refined for HTML5. Another thing that's been refined / added for HTML5 is to be able to use what are called vector graphics. You don't have to worry about those, but the point is, you can make a lot more sophisticated looking graphics using just HTML or a combination of HTML and JavaScript than you could prior to HTML5. All right, so like I said, that's why I put those examples in there. So those are the ones for HTML5. Then we've got some CSS examples. All right, here's an accordion menu. For some reason, I did spend some time on this, but unfortunately, I was doing this on Sunday, and you were competing with me watching football. So I didn't probably put the time and effort into this that I wanted to. What's supposed to happen in here? Notice if I click Contact Us. Is that pretty obvious what's happened there? It's an accordion menu, and it works just fine, as long as you don't click any of the other three. Because when you click the other three, this is what you get. See that? And it's just a problem with the CSS, but I didn't take the time to figure out what it was. All right. But this is how you can add an accordion using just CSS3. The reason I put that in there is here's how you can add an accordion with jQuery. So you can compare and contrast the two. Most of the time when you're creating a website, you can do the same thing in a multiple number of ways. So the question always gets asked, well, which one should I use? I always tell people you should use the one that makes the most sense to you. Whatever makes the most sense to you means. To some people, that means, well, which one has less code? I'll have to do less. Or which one is simpler to the human eye? So if I have to maintain them, which one would be easier for me to maintain? Well, you can look in here, and if I go into the CSS accordion 3 and look at this one, and I do a view page source, all right, this is basically done all with CSS. So there is a CSS file, so I can click on here. Hopefully I can click on here. All right, it's not going to let me, but that's fine. I'll go through it this way. And CSS, CSS3 examples, accordion menu. All right. So you'll notice there's a lot of CSS in here. And this is what I mentioned to you before. If you have not heard this before, if you have not, I'm sorry you haven't. But I want you to see this. All right. In fact, that one too. When you look at these examples right here, this may or may not make sense to you, any of it. And if it doesn't, it's okay. But what you have is almost the same tag put in here 5 or 6 times. I realize some of the stuff in there is different, but what I'm trying to get across is when it starts with -moz minus, that means that it's Firefox specific. When it starts with -WebKit minus, that means it's either Safari or Chrome specific. When it starts with -O, it's Opera, which is another browser. When it starts with -MS, that's Microsoft or IE. So the idea is you put all that stuff in there, and then you preface it with these browser prefixes. Then you put it in without any browser prefixes. And the idea is over time, as all these things converge, hopefully you'll be able to get rid of every one of these except the last one. The funny thing is, what's going to happen over time is people aren't going to take the time to remove that stuff that's there. That's just human nature. But the idea is, hopefully, as websites get built in the future, when everybody agrees on standards, all right, there'll be just one in there. So there'll be a lot less code. You get code bloat from this. Right now, it's necessary bloat. You've got to put extra code in there so you make sure because some of this stuff, really the gradients and stuff, that's CSS3. And different browsers have different levels of support of CSS3. Same thing with the HTML5 features. Different browsers have different support with HTML5 features. All right? And it just is how fast do they decide they're going to support something, how are they going to support it. All right? On the other, yes?
What's Z-index?
Okay, the question was, what's Z-index? I don't know what the Z stands for, but if you've got, if you're writing a page, a web page, and on that web page you've got a lot of different stuff, maybe some text and a bunch of different figures, etc. And maybe you've got something set up where you want something to overlay on top of something else. You can give it a higher Z-index. The higher the Z-index you give it, the more towards the foreground it gets. The lower the Z-index, the more towards the background it gets. All right? I hope that answers your question. That's about the best answer that I can really give you on it. All right? All right. Now, on the other hand, if we go in there and we take a look, and we look at the jQuery one, all right? Well, what you're going to notice in here, if I do a view page source, it's not going to look all that different. This is the stuff that was set up for it, all right? But there had to be some jQuery that was set up to make that work. All right, that should make sense. So what did we do in here? Well, we set up a div called accordion. This is the first thing that's in there. All right, so that's the first one. This is the second one that's in, or that's the second one. That's the third one, and that's the fourth one. All right, that's the good news. All right, the even better news is one of the reasons that jQuery was written as jQuery was written is if I go over to the jQuery UI accordion example. That's it. That says grab that thing that had a div, I should say an ID of accordion, and run the accordion method on it. That's all the code for it. All right, hopefully you understand that one of the reasons that jQuery was built was it's much easier for web designers. I should say this, I don't know if you understand the distinction between the two. There is a distinction between a web designer and a web developer. All right, if you notice, the name of this program is IT Web Software Developer. All right, and I was one of the people, they changed the name from what it used to be, and it's not really important. But I wanted to make sure that people understood that this was a developer degree, not a designer degree. If we were teaching web design here, we would probably end up, I would teach some of the classes, and you'd probably take classes in the marketing area. All right, because with web design, you learn about color, you learn about style, etc., that kind of thing. Most of the people who work here, who are in the marketing or marketing type area, don't have a lot of computer expertise. They know how to use a computer. I don't mean that they don't. And they could probably teach you that kind of stuff. That wasn't what this program was designed to be. This program, if you've never heard the story about it, is a hybrid of two programs they have in Madison. One that is literally just a web developer and one that is a programmer analyst. I tried to grab bits and pieces of each and make one program. And people have said, well, why don't you have two programs? Because we don't get enough students. Well, why does Madison do it? Because they get enough students. All right. We have on our full-time staff here, there's me, Denny Wright, and Arinda Conway. Madison, last time I heard, they had 17. So those are the differences between them. All right. But again, when you start to look at this, you start to realize that web designers can learn a little bit of jQuery, just enough to get by because they don't have to understand what's happening to make that work. When you call that accordion function, literally when you call that, what that means is somewhere, where is it? Somewhere in here, well, it doesn't say it, but somewhere in here, they handle the accordion. Right? It has to be handled someplace. But the idea is, rather than you having to go through, and whether I gave you the minified or the non-minified version of this, rather than you having to go through that and learn how to do it, this isn't hard. All right. So as time has gone on, what has happened is they've tried to make the JavaScript easier and easier for web designers and developers. All right, and now that isn't enough. Okay, and what do I mean by that? I was reading an article last night. I don't think I brought it with me this morning, and it's basically called something like The Future of CSS, and the author thinks there is a future of CSS. All right, and that's good news. But the I don't know if you call it bad news, but CSS is ever changing. And when you've got frameworks that are set up with things like Bootstrap, WordPress, etc., some of that stuff, what happens is a lot of the CSS gets written for you. All right, so it's not that it's not important, but it's becoming a little bit less important. All right. Plus, there is a product that's out now that's called React that allows you to kind of, I'm going to butcher the way I say this, but it kind of merges the CSS and the JavaScript. That goes against the way that you're supposed to write things, but it allows you through your JavaScript to kind of write some CSS. I'll just leave it at that. All right. So the next one in here is background opacity. And again, I try to put a few things in here that I think you at least should be familiar with. With opacity, you can notice the difference between these. All right, notice what happens when I take my mouse and put it over the button. You can see what happens. The opacity changes. All right, now this isn't Z-index, as Damien asked about, but opacity can be important because sometimes when you're showing something on a web page, you want it to be like, like this, 100% opacity. Okay, basically you want it to be, do you want it to be opaque or you want it to be transparent is what we're saying. All right, and the one way you can do it, again, is with Z-indexes, but sometimes the way you do it is with opacity. And really when you're working with opacity, you can set it like I did here, basically, where literally it's set to a certain amount, or you can come in with what we already looked at last week with the jQuery, where you've got fade in and fade out, because what are you doing there? You're working with the opacity. All right, the same kind of thing. So I tried to tie together some of the stuff I thought was at least pretty important. By now, people should understand how to create a table. The one thing about tables is over time, all right, the hype over tables, etc., is kind of gone down. The idea is today, the only time you're supposed to use a table in a website is for literally what's referred to as tabular data. So for instance, I've got one of the second year students, he's building a website right now, and he's not going to compete with like DraftKings or FanDuel, but it's the same kind of thing. So he has some tables in there. And in those tables, he shows the results of different games and different other stuff. That makes sense. What used to happen was that web designers would, if they created a master template for all of their work, they'd have a table. They'd have their entire website inside of a table. That's how they would do it. And usually inside of that table, they'd have other tables. And it was a way that you could easily line stuff up. All right, and sometimes people still do this. Rather than using CSS, which is what you're, quote, supposed to do, unquote, today, is, for example, that if I create an HTML form and I want everything to line up on the form, one way I can do it very simply is to put it all into a table. And it's very simple to line it up like that. But that's what what's, again, today, you're not supposed to really do it that way. All right. All right, and this was the only thing in here, this didn't show much. This is that last child thing, because we've started to talk about this a little bit. Last child, if you remember, we looked at last child and first child, and we looked at PREV for previous, NEXT, next, etc. All that stuff is taken. All those jQuery selectors are taken from CSS. So it's really important that for you to start learning jQuery, you have to understand CSS. And you have to understand CSS selectors. You have to understand how to create IDs. You have to understand how to create classes. And you have to understand how to create the stuff that's inside of those things. All right? All right. And then finally, the last one that was here was jQuery. So again, I already showed you the accordion. And again, this stuff isn't lined up because there's a bunch of divs in here that move stuff back and forth on the screen. And what I did was I literally got a lot of the stuff to line up, but then I was commenting stuff in and commenting stuff out. I just decided, the heck with it. Just let it go wherever it's going to go on the screen. All right, it really and truly wasn't that important because that's not what I was trying to show you. All right. Then next, this is a nice feature. And this really, again, is more an HTML5 feature. It's autocomplete. And you say, what do you mean? Well, if I type in an A, it gives me a drop down with every single thing that has an A in it. All right. And so again, it literally is an autocomplete. This is what Google uses. In fact, they call theirs auto suggest or Google suggest. But you'll notice if I change it from A to AL, everything goes away except for Alban. All right. And if I set it back again, it goes back to the way it is. Okay, and you can do some dickering around with this. So you can work in with what are called regular expression patterns to say, oh no, I only want stuff that starts with A, not something that has an A in it. Or I only want something that ends with A. And it's not that difficult to do. We start going through some of that stuff next semester. All right. The next one, like I said, didn't really work very well. What this was supposed to do, all right, was you were supposed to be able to put something in here, and here or in here. But if you left it blank and you click the register button, what was supposed to happen was, right now it literally is sending it, and I didn't want it to do that, but I just didn't look at it. It was supposed to give you messages right here. But I did go through that example with you where we used, and I'm going to show this to you. Hopefully you remember this from when we looked at it a week or two ago, where we did stuff like this, where we set up those rules and we had the associated messages. All right. So all that stuff is set up correctly, but somehow the communication isn't there. And like I said, I wish I had the time that I could have gone back and taken a look to see what the problem was, but I just didn't have the time. All right. And the last thing that was in there was just the tooltip. And you'll notice there's the tooltip example, another one. Okay. Well, what is this in? What this is basically all aesthetic stuff. Have the tooltip come in, have it slide down, and have it slide down with a delay of 1/10 of a second. When you hide it, have it fade out, give it a delay of 2/10 of a second. Position it at the center on the right, and this is basically the code for it right here. Just says perform the tooltip. And I think you all know what tooltips is, on the off chance you don't. If I go over to jQuery tooltip, it says this is a tooltip example. Well, what do you mean? Well, if I put my mouse there, there it is. This is the tooltip for the title. It faded in, it fades out. That's it. All right, so like I said, what I tried to do in here, and I always find this funny, for lack of better words, because I probably spent about 3 or 4 hours on this for something that takes a half an hour to explain to you. All right, so it doesn't oftentimes work like that. All right, I'm doing some consulting work on Fridays, and maybe I told you that, but I probably have put 100 hours into at least into the work preparing presentations and the like. Last 2 weeks ago, the presentation that I because I gauged it, I spent 12 hours on it. I did the presentation, it took 45 minutes. Somehow it just seemed unfair to me. All right. The good news is they're paying me. So, all right. So then that's about 8:30. So let's do this. What I'll do is I will go over chapter 1 in this. We'll change around the order of this a little bit. So I'm going to go over chapter 1. This is out of that Java book. All right. And somebody stop me, and I'll stop no later than, I'll go no later than 9, and it probably won't take that long. Okay. So some of the stuff that's in here, why write programs? Well, I used to give the smart aleck answer. Well, if you want to be able to pass the classes in here, you got to write programs. All right. But the idea is you're in here because you think this is something that will hopefully lead to a worthwhile career goal. All right. As you'll see next semester, there'll be people who, possibly some in this room, I don't know, but there'll be people who were in some of your classes this semester that won't be in the classes next semester. All right. Typically, the attrition rate here is anywhere from 25% to 50%. I've already started with 24 and had 12 the next semester. That's not all that uncommon. The good news is typically if there's 12, usually 10 out of those 12 will make it all the way through and graduate. And, sorry, if you haven't heard already, I've got 2 students that are both second-year students. All right, so they've completed almost 3 out of 4 semesters. They've both gotten full-time jobs already. All right, one is a web developer at Foremost Media. The other one is a .NET programmer at Prent. Now, the one at Prent, he's there on an internship. But if they like the job that he does, I don't know why they wouldn't. But they're going to hire him full-time. All right. So what I'm saying is there are jobs out there. I've said this to you before, and I don't want to get off on too big a tangent, but I do want to mention this to you because sometimes I'll say things and sometimes I'll forget. But if you have not done this yet, go out to the Blackhawk site and down somewhere near the bottom. I don't know where it is in here. There it is. If you have not joined Tech Connect, do join it. Because what will happen is you'll start getting ads. I get up to 15 a week that have jobs. Most of them are in Wisconsin. They can be anywhere. They can be in Janesville or Beloit. They can be in Madison. They're as far up as Superior. Sometimes they're in Rockford, Illinois. But there are a lot of open IT jobs right now. All right. I mean, to some people, well, if I can't get one in Janesville or Beloit, I don't want to get an IT job. It might be a lot harder for you to get placed then. All right. Other people have told me as soon as they, why are you in here? Because I want to get the hell out of Janesville or Beloit. All right. And everybody is someplace in between typically. But again, if you haven't done that, do that. And going along with that, if you look on the bulletin board over there and you look way to the right and down towards the bottom, it's kind of hard to see from where you are. But if you think, I realize you're in your first year. I get that. All right. But if you think, well, I might want to go on and get a 4-year degree, on Thursday they're having a transfer fair where they're having people from 20 different colleges. So if you're interested in possibly going on for a 4-year degree, you could stop over there and just say, I'm just curious what classes at Blackhawk are going to transfer to your school, type of an idea, because that's what they're there for. Also, if you haven't heard the shtick already, Thursday is the winter social, so there is a free lunch on Thursday. I think it's going to start at 11:30, and there's a magician from 12 to 1. Never seen the magician. They used to have a hypnotist all the time. They used to have a hypnotist all the time. He's fantastic. He goes all over the United States, and he's funny because I've seen him about 3 times, and he always does a thing where he's got about 8 people up there, and he can tell who is really hypnotized and who's not. He'll kick off the ones who are not really hypnotized. But he'll say, okay, when you wake up, you're naked. And these people wake up and they're all sitting there and they're all like this, and it's funny as heck. He puts them back down. He goes, now when you wake up, the audience is naked. And there have been, and it's usually guys. They'll fixate on a woman out in the crowd. They're just sitting there like this. And I've seen it where people actually leave because they're just so freaked out by it. But like you said, I have no reason to think that guy won't be good too. So, all right. So that's the transfer fair, and that's the extra stuff. So the Y program, we're not going to really talk about. We'll very quickly go over the hardware and software, but we'll talk a little bit about the programming languages, the programming process, and object-oriented programming. To me, that class next semester, 152, 143, again, that's the class. And as I said, the book, which is not cheap, Roger will tell you, it's about $150. I have found a PDF of it. It is now out there on the P drive under the in-class folder. All right, if you want to copy that. I'd still recommend that, it's much easier for most people to have a hard copy and something to go with. All right. So they go through some of this stuff. They talk about hardware and they talk about software. Again, if you've got a desire to learn more about CPUs and main memory, etc., you can read this and or you can take one of the classes. There's a beginning operating systems class here. There's a beginning networking class here. They're just not part of this program. All right. So they show all the computers organized and they break it up into the different parts of the computer. And that's all fine and dandy. But I'm just going to jump up here to page 6 and talk about programming languages. I think everybody in here remembers that one of the first things that I had you do at the beginning of the semester is we spent a little bit of time in this class and we went over a bunch of different iterations of that payroll program. All right, I think you all remember that. It was, I remember that. Okay, but it went from very simple, where I hard-coded in my name, the number of hours that I worked, and my pay rate. So when you ran it, it gave the same results every time. And we went from there to where we were using arrays and functions and function returns and a bunch of other stuff. Well, guess what? Starting next semester, we're going to do almost the same thing, but instead of writing that stuff and instead of writing it in JavaScript, we'll now be writing it in Java. So you can start to see some of the differences between them. And if you've never heard the story, I'll keep it real short and sweet. JavaScript was never going to be called JavaScript. It was just about to be released, and it was called LiveScript. All right. Right around that time is when Java was introduced, the Java programming language. And it got a lot of acceptance very quickly. And the people who wrote LiveScript talked to the people who owned Java and said, can we call our product JavaScript, basically. They made an arrangement. But it's one of the things that confuses people. They're not the same thing. JavaScript is basically a browser-side language that allows you to do a lot of things. You can use it on the server too, and it's being used more and more. But it's not set up as a programming language to create full-fledged applications. Java is an object-oriented programming language that is designed to create either full-fledged applications, so I could create an entire payroll application in Java. Could I do it in JavaScript? I would think that'd be a nightmare. I'm not saying it would be impossible, but I've never heard of one. There could be one out there. All right. And also JavaScript, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the semester, that JavaScript is what's called object-based, which means it has object-oriented features. We've used almost none this semester. All right. Everything you do in Java is object-oriented. Everything you do is based off of classes and the like. So they talk in here about what is a program. Again, we're going to go back and do the same thing with those payroll programs. Here are some of the languages. All right. Now, next semester, you're going to be taking 2 of these languages that are in this list, and those are C#. Many people will tell you that C# was kind of Microsoft's answer to Java because there are a lot of similarities between the two. What is the actual estimated learning curve to go from C# to Java or Java to C#? So if you're a Java programmer going to C#, or if you're a C# programmer going to Java, is about 2 weeks. They're very similar in nature. Like Java, C# is also an object-oriented programming language. All right. Now, for years, Java was owned by Sun Microsystems, and it was until Oracle bought them. So basically, the way that life works in the IT world is anything that hasn't been bought yet by Microsoft will be bought by Oracle, and kind of what's left is Mark Zuckerberg buys it. That's pretty much your main players as far as what's out there. All right. If you care, if you want to start looking at this stuff, I want to just quickly show you 2 different URLs. The first is, and all you have to write in here is, what is it? Is it java.sun.com? Yeah, java.sun.com, and it pushes you off to an Oracle site. And you're like, well, Oracle, who cares? Oracle is another relational database management system. All right, it's more powerful than MySQL. In fact, guess what? Oracle bought MySQL. All right, they now own that. All right, and it's like SQL Server, which is Microsoft's version of it. But the point is, this page is their Java page. And if I go out to this page and I go down and I start looking at these essential links that are on the side here, and I find the one that says Java APIs over on the side. API is an acronym for Application Program Interface. It's what makes the language go. So if I click that link, it's going to say, well, which spec do you want? And guess what? I don't care. I'm just going to take the standard edition, the newest one. And what you have over here, so if I start going over here now with the stuff that you see up here, this is their API documentation. So if I want to learn more, let's say, about strings, all right, I'm going to come down here and eventually I'm going to find something that says string. There it is. So I click over there and it starts showing me over here all the different stuff about a string. All right. Now, I've had people in the past that, well, I'm going to learn this language. I'm going to go in there and memorize this. Well, good luck. All right. If you're that good, you really shouldn't be taking classes here. You should be teaching classes here. All right. The other one, outside of java.sun.com, is if you go out to msdn.microsoft.com. MSDN means it's the Microsoft Developer Network. So if you go out to msdn.microsoft.com, all right, and this doesn't look like much, but the key thing is up over here, you can search for basically anything you want. So if I wanted to search for C# strings, something like that, notice that there's one of the things that came up was the string class. There it is. So then I click on that and boom. Wow, there's only 968,000 results. But if I go to the first one here, this is all of their documentation. All right. The other one, you already know about jQuery.com, and that's the one you use for the 167 class, or API.jQuery.com or jQueryUI.com. All right, those. But I think is it dev.mysql.com? I don't remember. I think this is it. This is the MySQL site. This has got in here, the documentation that's in here. It's really, really, really good. One of the reasons it's good is for years, this before they were bought out, they were an open source product. And usually when you've got open source products, for people to use them and keep using them, they have to be written pretty well. All right. And the documentation that's in here is really good. All right. So if you want to start looking, that's stuff that you can look at. All right.
Anything that's open source?
Sure.
Because Linux doesn't seem like it's open source.
Technically, most people will tell you that MySQL is still open source because the way I look at open source is can you get it for free? You can get MySQL for free. But if you want MySQL support, you've got to pay. So for here, it's free. If I have a question, they do have helplines, but they're not going to put me very high in their queue. You know what I mean? I'm not going to mean much to them. But if I'm a Fortune 100 company and I've got a question, they're going to answer it right away. All right. All right. So the little history of Java, I told you some of it. If you didn't hear the rest of the story, so to speak, literally the Java, before they released Java, it was going to be called Oak, O-A-K, after the tree. Because James Gosling, who's one of the people who originated the language, had a huge oak tree outside of his window when he looked out there and thought that'd be a cool name for a language. Okay? Well, he did that until they realized when they tried to register it, there was already a language named Oak. So they couldn't. History says that what it was they were all having coffee and they said, oh, we're having Java. Let's call it Java. I don't know if that's true or not. All right. One thing about Java that's different about Java as opposed to most programming languages, I just want you to hear this. With most programming languages, what happens is if a programming language is both interpreted and compiled, all right? With virtually every other programming language that I know, other than Java, you interpret first, then you compile. That's just the way that it works. Java does it in reverse. Java compiles first, then it interprets. All right? And if you don't know the difference between the two, I'll let you look it up. It's not that it's really that big a thing. All right? The main thing is with Java, you're going to know on your screen right away if you've got errors because you're going to get red squiggly lines underneath it, which means you're doing something that it doesn't understand. All right? Java also allows you to create either applications or applets. What's the difference? An applet runs under a browser. Many games, especially older games, were created before JavaScript really became a more powerful language. They used to be all written in Java. They were written as Java applets. We have one chapter in the advanced class where we go through Java applets. Everything else is on Java applications. Everything. All right. So they talk about the things that make up programming languages. I'll let you look at that quickly yourselves. But the key thing is syntax, the last one that's there. Java has about, I don't know, it must be between 20 and 50 keywords, which means you can only use them in a certain way. And I'll just say this. You don't have to write it down, but commit this to memory. As much as any other programming language, Java is case sensitive. So if you create a variable and you call it age, and it's AGE, little a, little g, little e, If you do that in JavaScript, like we've been doing, you say var age equal 21. Then if later on in your program you say age equal 53, but you put a big A in there accidentally instead of a little a, JavaScript is very forgiving. It'll create a brand new variable, so now you'll have one with a little age and one with a capital A with a GE, and they'll each have their own value. With Java, as soon as you try to do that, it'll say you never defined that variable, and the program will blow up. All right, and that's what drives people nuts about both languages. Okay, because Java is known as basically it's a very tightly structured language. It's a very it's not a loose language like JavaScript is. All right. This is the kind of stuff that you're going to write, just so you see it, right here. That's a Java program. There's not much to it, yet there's a lot to it. And what I mean by that, this is not real different from what you're going to see when you go into the C# class. All right? And in that public class with a name, curly braces, etc., that kind of stuff will be the same. When you declare variables, you've got to give them a type. You can also give them a value. So there's 11 lines. It's 8:47. I'm going to see in 3 minutes if I can go through this entire program and explain to you quickly everything that's in here. Public. That's called an access modifier or an access specifier. That means that this particular class, payroll, can be called from my program or anybody else can. It's public. All right? It's available to any and all. It's a class. I mentioned to you before that Java is a case-sensitive language. Since you say class payroll, you must save this file as payroll.java, and the caseness has to be exactly the same, or it won't compile. So if you save it as payroll with a little p, and you have big P here, it wouldn't work. What I'm going to do the first week of class, when everybody who's in the class is here, is I'm going to say, these are the rules. All right, it's the old joke. I'm not going to say, hey, these are the rules. Do you like them? No, these are the rules that we're going to follow. All right. Again, everything that's in here, these are your delimiters. So it's a block structure language, and blocks are delimited with curly braces. Public, we already went over. Static. Static has many meanings, but typically static means there's just one of them, and it's shared by everybody. So there can only be one main in a Java application. There must be a main in a Java application. For the first few chapters that we go through, everything we do, we'll do in main. Everything. Then we'll break it up and start writing our own functions or methods. So it's public, it's static. Void means it doesn't return anything. Notice there's no return statement here. The name of this is main. This is probably the hardest thing to understand, but again, inside of the parens right here, those are the arguments. This says there's an array of strings that's called args. All right, I don't want to get into it any more depth than that because I confuse you even more than I maybe already have. Here we're creating three variables. One called hours, one called gross pay, one called pay rate. Hours is an integer, meaning it can only hold a whole number. We are both creating the variable, which is what's done here in hours, and initializing the variable right there. All right. Here we're creating two variables. And here again, we are declaring the variable, double pay rate, and we're initializing it. This one, we're just saying double gross pay. We're not initializing. So literally, its value is null, N-U-L-L, meaning it doesn't have a value. All right, so if I try to print out the value of gross pay before I set it, I get an error. What's called a null pointer exception. All right, so 40, 25. And I'm saying take that 40, multiply it by 25, and stick the results in gross pay. Then on the screen, system.out means my screen, basically, by default. It says print, your gross pay is, with a $sign, and it should say 1,000. That's the whole program. All right. But that's how you end up writing. The point is, you must have at least one class in every Java file. All right, and at least and one and only one public class. You can put private classes inside of public classes. We don't do that until the second semester, or the advanced class. Here's the keywords. Again, you can count them yourself, but there's somewhere around 50, maybe 60. So in other words, I can't create a variable and call it Boolean. I can't do that. Boolean is a data type. We'll talk about all this stuff next semester. All right? And they go through kind of what I just went through, what gross pay is, the punctuation. All JavaScript statements must end with a semicolon. That's one of the reasons in the JavaScript class I kept saying put semicolons on the end, even though the system doesn't always require it. In this language, they're required. If you don't believe me, just write your program, get it to work, and start taking off semicolons and watch what happens. You know already what variables are, a named memory location, so there's nothing new there. They talk about this just so you hear the verbiage. When stuff gets compiled in Java, all the stuff is done internally by something that's called the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine. You don't have to worry about it because virtually any computer that any laptop or desktop or whatever that's been sold since about the year 2000 all have the JVM on it. Right. They've got different editions. You can read that if you're interested in it. All the stuff that they say right here, this Java C and all that, that's all correct. But as John would attest to, we're going to be using our own IDE next semester. You're going to be using two different IDEs next semester. An IDE is an integrated development environment. All right. In the class with Denny, you're going to be using Visual Studio. In here, we're going to be using Eclipse. Can you write Java programs in Visual Studio? I believe yes, you can. We're not going to. All right. So we won't have to do it like this. With ours, it'll be click this button, and it does all that stuff for us. So they explain here what an IDE is, okay, and they talk about what it is, etc. So you can read that if you're interested. They go through the programming process here. I wish I could take this and make this mandatory, because if you look at this real closely, there's 9 steps, and technically the first 4 steps that are in here do not involve a computer. But the problem is I give an assignment and people feel like they have to run to their computer and start coding right away. But steps 1 through 4 say think about what you're doing, map it out, and then start doing it. And you've heard me say this before. The second year people heard it again the other day, and John was here for it, that write a little code, test it. Write a little more code, then test it. Don't write hundreds of lines and then start testing. So they go through this programming process in here. Make sure you know what the program is going to do. Visualize it running on the computer. All right, start to map it out. Check your mapping that you've done for logical errors, then use the computer. All right, correct any errors, keep repeating that as much as possible. Once it appears to work, get a bunch of test data and start running it. All right, correct any errors you find with your test data and keep going through it and going through it and going through it. All right. If you're going to read any part of this chapter, if you really want to start to understand what object orientation is, then read this section in 1.7. Because again, it says Java is an object-oriented language, and it says, again, it's not object-based like JavaScript is, which means that you can use object orientation, but you don't have to. Here you have to. And the way that most books explain it, and I think he does in here someplace also, I thought he did have it, but I guess he doesn't, is imagine, and I might have even said this example to you before. Imagine that a developer comes and buys a huge plot of land with 500 acres on it and decides that on those 500 acres that they're going to build 500 homes. And each, they have 5 house plans. So there'll be house 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get the idea. Each one of those house plans is what would be called a class. It's a blueprint for what a house should look like. Each individual house that you make from the blueprint is an object. So my house looks like some of the other houses in my neighborhood. Mine's the only one that's that color. Mine's the only one where they stupidly put some wood on it where I wanted siding, but they said we couldn't do it, which was a lie. And mine's the only one that has the color of shutters that I have. But you can drive around the neighborhood and see other houses that, that's your house. All right. So what I'm saying is those objects, those house objects are different, but they're both created from the same house class. All right. So if you want more on that's what it's about. All right. And they explain it on about 4 or 5 pages in here. And that's it. All right. So since I decided to go this route, what I will do next week is we're going to do two things. All right. I'm going to go through chapter 2. It's not a short chapter. This last one, believe it or not, was short. This chapter here is about 80 pages long. All right. So we'll go through that, and I'm just going to hit the high points. But then what I'd like us to do, possibly on Thursday, or Wednesday rather, a week from today, is to write a simple Java program as a class, and just walk you through everything. John will love that because the first time that people start using the editor, it's a lot of fun because it doesn't work right for everybody. All right, so we'll do that next time. All right. So again, if you came in late or didn't hear this, I forgot the microphone last time. I've got it today. But again, out there on the system, I did go back and re-record the lecture from Monday, so that's out there, along with the one from today, which will be out there in about a half an hour. All right? So that's all that I had. Like I said, I was going to keep these last lectures down to about an hour or so, at least this week. Next week, it might end up taking most of the hour for those two periods. All right? Because that's all that I've got.